Good morning. Welcome to another employer panel with the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. And this morning, we're talking about addiction in the workplace. This is nothing new. It's something that employers across the country are faced with every day. Sometimes the topic of addiction will stop an employer in their tracks because they're not quite sure how this will impact their business. This morning, we're excited to bring this webinar to you with our partners, EDSI. And we'll hear from local employers and we'll discuss the benefits of hiring those in recovery, as well as best practices and incentives to hire those that are in active recovery. So I want to welcome everybody, and I want to highlight Jim Burley and Kevin Watson, who are our partners from EDSI that are here with us this morning. Kevin and Jim, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say before we dive right in?
Well, thank you, Trish, for sponsoring this, and we love working with the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. And yeah, just thank you for all the support and assistance. And we're thrilled that everybody's able to join us today because we all know that there's a labor shortage and we're all struggling to find talent. And this is really an opportunity to think about alternative sources of talent for your organization and how to effectively work with these folks. And do it in a positive way. And we're going to give you some best practices to do that. And really, it will give you a leg up on finding additional talent and retaining some great talent that is out there.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. I would just echo what Jim said. Anything else I would say would just be redundant at this point, but wanted to thank all the panelists and thank the attendees for carving out some time this morning as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So now we're going to do some self-introductions from our esteemed panel. First, we're going to hear from Nancy Abrams, Esquire. Nancy, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's, again, Nancy Abrams. I am a member of Spector, Gadon, Rosen, Vinci in Philadelphia. I am part of the Labor and Employment Group, and I have been practicing labor and employment law for over 40 years. It's hard to believe. And I have had a number of circumstances in which I have helped employers wade through issues with individuals who come to work either under the influence or are coming into the workplace from an recovery program. So hopefully I can add some legal insight into what the practical aspects are that the other panelists are providing.
Fantastic, Nancy. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Now we'll hear from Chrissy Corson.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Chrissy Corson. I have been working in the field of recovery for about 10 years now. I am with MVP Recovery currently, and I've been there since its inception. I am a drug and alcohol counselor. I certified in relapse prevention, and I helped get second chance employment off the ground a few years back, up and going, where I encouraged Delaware County residents to give those of us in recovery a chance to actually get going, get some traction on the ground. And as somebody with 12 years sober, I really feel like I can speak for a majority of the sober community in just needs and wanting to have a second chance and being treated as equals. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Chrissy. And now we'll hear from Mike Ranck.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Ranck with the Community YMCA of Eastern Delaware County. We run 3 facilities, one in Lansdowne, one in Ridley, and our newest in Springfield. We have a saying at the Y that we're here to improve the community for all, and that includes those in recovery. We're excited to be on this panel and talk about how we can offer employment and what our expectations are of everyone who works at the Y. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for being with us this morning. And now we're going to hear from Brian Kelly. Brian is a managing partner for his company, and he is going to talk about an added benefit to hiring those in recovery. Sometimes employers, when it comes down to choosing one candidate over another, we want to just be helpful. So employers know that if they do give this person who's in active recovery a chance, that there may be some additional benefits. So Brian, thank you for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then jump into your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Our company, Cost Management Services, have actually been doing work opportunity tax credits for over 25 years now. And actually, the work opportunity tax credit program goes back and extends all the way back to the Reagan administration. So some people that might be on the call today and saying, hey, how come I haven't heard about it? Is because it is a pretty abstract tax credit for employers. So let's go through that. Do we have a small PowerPoint that we're going to talk about today? We have been doing WOTC screening since 1997, so a couple of years. We built actually automation portals for our customers back in 2015 to basically create a paperless environment. And our whole goal for everybody on this call is to help them maximize the work opportunity tax credit and the investment of time that they put into it. WOTC itself, as I said, goes all the way back to the Reagan administration and the targeted job tax program. One thing I want to add or say to you today is that whatever we learn, we can't go back in time on these tax credits. There's no going retro. So it's basically, we got 28 days to submit specific people into that program. And so just want to let you know that. Employers in the last couple of years have actually claimed $3.8 billion in tax credits. So there's funding out there for the program, and we want to help employers get through that process. It has renewed, and it has come back so we can process to 12/31/2022, 25, I'm sorry. So the program itself, the way I look at it is we've been through the employee retention tax credit. We've already been through the payroll protection programs. So this is basically a third step for employers to receive federal tax credits for hiring folks. There's no limit on the number of hires that you can have. And there's no limit on the potential tax credits that are available to you. Actually, let's go to the next slide if we could. So under the work opportunity tax credit program, there's actually about 10 different categories of people that would fall into what is considered a targeted group that you can take a tax credit on. SNAP, which is basically food stamps, is one of the highest measures of tax credits that we can obtain, as well as the Vow to Hire Heroes program, which allows us to get tax credits if you're hiring the vets coming into the workforce. The largest one is, and what we're seeing today, is basically the high unemployment one. So people that are unemployed for over 26 weeks is an area that's gaining a lot of attention because we have so many people in the workforce right now. So our goal for employers, and I'm going to keep this quick and move it over to you, is to really help you and employers basically obtain these federal tax credits. If you can go to the next slide. So what we do for employers is basically a full screening of every new hire that they hire and bring on board, and help them get respective tax credits that they deserve. And that's all I'm going to say. So I'll turn it back over to Trish.
Great, Brian. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I'm sure we will have some more questions about that towards the end. Now, as we move into the Q&A portion of this this webinar this morning, I'm going to invite everybody that's viewing this as an attendee. If you have any questions, you see that I think we're all very familiar with Zoom at this point, but you see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, please type your questions into the Q&A. And this way we can keep track of if they're answered. And if we don't have the time or the resources to answer your question this morning, we will absolutely get back to you and follow up so we can take it for next steps. So please write any questions or thoughts that you have that might be pertinent to the conversation into the Q&A box so we can answer this as we go along this morning. So I want to jump right in to start asking our questions to our panelists, but I want to start with our labor law attorney. And I want to ask if there is are there, before we get into why and what makes these folks so passionate and so energetic about hiring, are there any special legal considerations for hiring those in active recovery?
Absolutely. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act also protects people with disabilities. And addiction is considered to be a disability under both the ADA and the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. But there's a big but there. It only applies, and this is something that is really unique to addiction. It only applies to people who are in recovery. It does not apply to anyone who is currently using or abusing either an illegal substance or alcohol or something of that nature. So that when you talk about providing reasonable accommodation and taking that into account and not discriminating against people in recovery in hiring, if you don't hire someone because they have an addiction and they are in recovery, that is a violation of the ADA and the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. However, there are certain things that an employer can do to give themselves more peace of mind, and what of these steps you take very often will depend on whether or not somebody, for an employee, was having attendance problems or had an accident, and it turns out that they're an addict, and you permit them to go into a recovery program and then they come back to the workforce. You can usually put greater provisos on that than someone just newly coming in. But one thing that is generally recognized is addiction is a one-strike rule. If someone falls off the wagon, as using the colloquialism, and starts using again and it affects their work, then you don't have to give them a second chance to go to a recovery program. You can terminate their employment then. It is also generally recognized that you can require that somebody who is in recovery take periodic and possibly unannounced drug or alcohol tests, so that you can put protections in place to make sure that the person truly is in recovery and is not currently using, and that they won't pose a danger to the rest themselves or the rest of the workforce. And that proviso generally provides most employers with the peace of mind that they need to take that additional step and take somebody as an employee who is in recovery that they might not otherwise take.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. And I'm just going to pause for a second because I see Chrissy has her hand raised. Chrissy, you want to add something, please?
I do. So while that is excellent information, I just wanted to jump in as a person. First of all, with right now, we are seeing an unprecedented time of alcoholism really kind of going through the roof. And what's interesting is that employers right now will not hire someone that discloses, hey, I'm in recovery, I'm in active recovery. Whereas right now, there are people that have been working on Zoom that are in active alcoholism or functionally alcoholic, right? So we need to kind of take a look at that too, because there's a lot of weekend warriors, as we like to say, out there that are functional alcoholics, and we're hiring them. Yet somebody that's saying, hey, I'm actively in recovery, whereas maybe not. I also wanted to jump on, Nancy mentioned random drug tests. And while I am absolutely for stating that, that we have the ability to do that, I am 100% against actually doing that unless you have just cause, only because it would really make that person feel very targeted and very shameful And guilt and shame as a drug and alcohol counselor is something I really tend to try to stay away from, because shame says to that person, I am bad, right? And guilt, it's like, I did a bad thing, so therefore this person's, I'm a bad person, they're going to target me, and they should. And you're going to keep going through that, and it's a very humiliating experience. So I really just wanted to get on that. While you do have the ability to do that, maybe put some specifics around that. If you show up looking like you're under the influence, we might request a drug test, but be really very careful with individuals. And that's all individuals in general, right?
I just want to follow up. Those are very good points. And you know, the unfortunate reality is that alcohol has always been treated differently than other substances, because alcohol is legal, and drinking is a part of the corporate culture in a lot of businesses, so that alcohol has always been treated differently. And I don't know that that's going to change, because that's pretty ingrained. And that's a very good point, that there is that difference being made. As to the random drug testing, generally, as an attorney, I would only recommend that if it is somebody who was an employee, went into a recovery program, and is coming back from that recovery program to the same employer, and is just newly out of the recovery program. Because in those sorts of situations, because the employee was actively using and the employer gave the accommodation of permitting them to go into the recovery program, then there is more of a sense that the employee needs to be monitored. And as long as that is set out even before the employee goes into the recovery program, that's part of the condition of getting your job back after you're done with the recovery program.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. And I think maybe you're going, like, it's definitely a legal issue, right? But I think also maybe we just kind of take our own moral and ethical judgment into that individual situations.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was great conversation. And I think everybody's taking away so much with this. So for my next question, I'm going to go to Mike Ranck. And I know that, Mike, you started out by telling us a little bit about the why and why you believe in hiring these folks. But can you just give us a brief overview of you, your position, and why you are passionate about hiring and supporting all individuals, but specifically those that might be in recovery?
Sure. Thanks, Trish. I'm the CEO of the Y, so ultimately I'm responsible for everything that goes on within our buildings, and responsible for everyone who's employed by the Y. I believe firmly and passionately that my role as CEO is to ensure that everyone has the opportunity for success, irregardless of their backgrounds or irregardless of their current struggles. We believe strongly that unless a person poses a threat to themselves or to others, that we continue to deal with everyone at the same level and on the same terms. We have worked with MVP Recovery, and we do have currently one employee who's working with us, who started as part-time and has been promoted to full-time work. And I have to say she's terrific. We don't, initially there were some issues with being on time, but you know, everyone has those issues. So just because a person's in recovery doesn't mean that they're going to be late all the time. But it is something that you have to take one step at a time. But you would do that with people who aren't in recovery. In listening to Chrissy and Nancy talk about drug and alcohol testing, our policy here at the Y is if we believe that you're under the influence while on duty, we have the right and the obligation to say you need to go get tested immediately. And if you decline that test, then you're suspended until we can work the situation out or determine what was going on. We have some critical positions that we obviously have to be very mindful of in that sense, in terms of bus drivers or people working with childcare or people working with our members. But all in all, people are people. and people have different struggles. I come from a family where my grandfather was an alcoholic. So I'm very passionate and concerned about making sure we're doing the right thing and giving people the opportunity. As I said, our goal here at the Y is to make sure that everyone succeeds in our community, irregardless of your background. So we take that very seriously.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mike. So you mentioned the part-time start, and I'm going to either maybe throw this one to Chrissy, but please, anybody, if you have some thoughts on this, please jump in. But you mentioned that the individual started part-time. So Chrissy, is that something that you recommend for people in, just coming into active recovery? Do you recommend that they start part-time so they have some time and flexibility to be able to, do what they need to outside of work hours? Or is that something, that just helps them get acclimated? I know that there's a big difference between somebody that's been in recovery for 10 years and somebody that's, new and in active recovery. But for that new person just coming into the workplace, is there something that you would suggest that an employer do differently?
Absolutely. And it all really depends on the levels of care and the advocacy the person is actually taking on their own, right? So if somebody had a drinking or drug problem and they went to an inpatient treatment center, for the standard is 28 days. Sometimes they get less, sometimes they get more, and they went in and they did their 28 days. A lot of people will say, okay, great, I'm cured, I'm going to go right back to work. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's quite a bit of time that you need to attend IOP levels of care, which is an intensive outpatient 3 times a week. And then you drop down, and your schedule should be flexible so that you can get the ongoing treatment that you need. In fact, there are studies that say it takes approximately 90 days for your cognitive ability to get back to actual baseline prior to use. And that is when the real behavior change can set in. So again, that speaks to like the need for longer treatment stays at other places, but also really just for people to know that, hey, like 90 days is a real typical number. And then you can do part-time and slowly get into it. So yeah, I think there's definitely some consideration that needs to be taken around that. And also some grace if somebody is coming back to work, and you might want them to come back full-time immediately because they're a great worker. But they really do need that time to recover and to focus on themselves.
Great point. Mike, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I didn't, I hope I wasn't misinterpreted. The person that's working for us started in a part-time capacity because that's the only position we had. And when a full-time position opened, she interviewed for that position and was our top candidate for the job. So it wasn't something that we said, oh, she's in recovery, we can only start her part-time. It was, that's all we had. And when the full-time came up, she interviewed and was the top choice for the position, and we're thrilled to have her.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It really
does.
Yes.
Yeah, add something. Yes, keeping in mind that addiction is a disability under the applicable statutes, working a part-time schedule or being able to take off to attend therapy sessions, group meetings, whatever, may be a reasonable accommodation. And if it's medically necessary and there is the physician's support that is medically necessary, then that may be something that the employer has to consider and allow. The same way, if someone has an accident and needs to go to physical therapy, then a reasonable accommodation could be giving them time off during the workday to go to physical therapy. So that needs to be kept in mind, that someone coming in who is in recovery should have that interactive discussion with the employer if they do in fact need to work not a full-time schedule or just need time, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and have that discussion with the employer, because that could be a reasonable accommodation.
And I'm sorry, Trish, I'm just going to jump in. Nancy, I think that's a great point. We tell every employee that comes to the Y, we have 3 tenets for employees. Family comes first, you come second, and then the job comes third. So we know we've made some accommodations with a number of employees, either who are not in recovery and have physical therapy for injuries, or for the individual that's working with us that has certain days she cannot work because of obligations outside of the Y. So we've been able to do that, but we keep those in mind because it is important for our community to get healthier, that everyone take care of family first and then themselves. And then the job comes third, even though we're all in a crunch for staff, but that's how it has to be.
Mike, and I think that really goes to show that the kind of environment that you've created within your branches, that people really do feel comfortable coming to work, and they know that it's not just punching a clock, that it is really a community supporting each other and supporting the community. So I think that goes a long way, as other employers might be listening, thinking, how do they get so many people to work there? Well, I think it is where they do put family first. And that makes such a difference for somebody, getting up in the morning and going to their job, knowing that if something happens, their employer's not going to say, I'm sorry, you've got an obligation, you have to be here if something happens. So I really think that goes to show the environment that you've created as, in the leader of the community wise of Ridley and Lansdowne and Springfield. It really goes to show that that is such a strong part of our community.
Thank you.
Nancy, as we're talking about, hiring and bringing folks into the workplace, are there any other things that, are kind of coming to mind that we should be mindful of, that an employer should be thinking of, with this as a disability, that they should remember that they need to keep in mind as they're hiring these folks and then making those reasonable accommodations?
Actually, under the law, they shouldn't be considering it unless it would somehow adversely affect the job. And there are some positions, and the same way that there are certain positions that you are permitted to do a criminal background check. Generally, you're not, but there are certain positions that you are. For example, Mike, I'm sure you're aware of this, that anybody who does childcare, it's mandatory in Pennsylvania that they have a criminal background check, and that they have one every year. Generally, first of all, if somebody is in active recovery and it's a situation where they've been in recovery for a period of time, I know, people are in recovery for decades. It's a disability because it's a condition that doesn't go away. And it's not something that, unless you need some sort of reasonable accommodation, that you even need to disclose to the employer. And it definitely is something that employers should not ask about. As I said, I've been practicing for a very long time, and I have seen the evolution of job postings and job applications. I mean, job applications used to have asked for your date of birth, which is a big no-no, because, it could be evidence of age discrimination. And I'm not aware of legislation or ordinances. Philadelphia is very proactive as far as, for example, you cannot do criminal background check unless and until there is an offer, conditional offer on the table. You cannot in Philadelphia ask for an employee's salary history because of the disparate salary levels between men and women. I'm not aware of something similar regarding addiction, but unless there is a need for an accommodation from the time that the employee is hired, it shouldn't even come up. And it's not an area that employers should be asking about unless they are doing a type of an affirmative action where they are actively seeking out people who are coming out of a recovery program and trying to build that population into their workforce.
Okay.
I do want to jump in real quick just to elaborate on something that Nancy said when she said people have been in recovery for decades, but it doesn't go away. And while that's true, I think it's important to remember that that person has just as good of a chance as staying sober as somebody who never came to you and said, hey, I have a problem, as developing a drug problem, right? So I have just as good of a chance as staying sober than somebody who has never had a problem developing a habit to, opiates or alcoholism, right? So it's not something where it's going to, I'm 12 years sober, so my needs are much, much less than somebody who's newly coming into a program. And somebody next to me that's never had a alcohol or drug problem, we probably have about the same chance of either me relapsing or them developing an addiction.
Mhm. So one of the things that Nancy just mentioned was criminal background checks, and that in some places you cannot do the criminal background check until the position is offered. So what is an employer to do, or even on the other hand, somebody in recovery being an advocate for themselves? So something is on their history. They have a criminal background for whatever reason, and it's been quite a long time. So how does one advocate for themselves, making sure that the employer maybe knows that something is going to come up on their background, but letting them know that this was part of their history and not happening again? So is there something that you would suggest either to the employer as how they should handle that situation, maybe Nancy legally, and then for the person that is, the candidate, the person being hired, is there a certain way that they should advocate for themselves to let the employer know that this is something that might come up on the background?
First of all, again, you can't get a criminal background check for every position in Pennsylvania. There are only certain ones that you can even get a criminal background check, and you can also only go back a certain number of years. I believe it's 7, it may be 10, but I believe it's 7. Unless, it's something that, somebody was convicted for fraud and embezzlement and they want to work as a bank teller. That sort of situation where it is the crime that they were convicted of is very pertinent to the position. So as far as the employer goes, they may not be doing them. A lot of employers don't do them. If they have to do them, they also, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, if they're considering not actually giving the person the job because of the criminal background check, they are required by that law to give the employee, the applicant, the opportunity to explain the situation and either it wasn't me or I was an active addict at the time, and now that I've been in recovery for 5 years, it's not something that would happen again. And work with, and I would counsel my clients to work with the person, particularly if it's something that they just got out of jail and it is a crime that could affect the job that they're doing. Then I have no problem saying, unless this wasn't the person, you're fine not to hire them. If, however, it's something that was 5, 6, 7 years ago, just within the time period that they can consider, and there is a mitigating factor, and I would absolutely characterize addiction as a mitigating factor that no longer exists. Not the addiction, but the fact they were actively using, and that's why they broke into houses or whatever, and that behavior isn't likely to recur because they're in recovery. And that, again, is a discussion that the employer should have at that. I have this report, your criminal background, let's talk about this piece of it, and give the applicant the opportunity to advocate for themselves.
I think those are great points. I will say at the Y, we run 3 different background checks because of the nature of our business and the number of children and families and seniors that enter our facilities. We do a PA state police check, a Department of Public Welfare check for child abuse crimes, and then an FBI fingerprint check, which we're required to do for our child care programs. But we do that on everyone who works for us. And we do that some of them every 2 years, some of them every 3 to 5 years. And we're upfront with people. And what we expect is that if someone does have something on their record, that they let us know. And we deal with each situation individually. So someone who may be in active recovery, who has a number of DUIs, would not be eligible to drive for us in our vehicles. And that's an insurance requirement. And that would be true for anyone. So we look at each one individually and talk with each person individually. And the hope is that when we let them know these checks are being run, is that they come to us and say, this is going to pop up and this is the reason why. And we work with that individual through those situations and deal with them.
Thank you, Mike. Chrissy, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that's, I like how Mike stated that it's really very individualized. And saying when something does come up, kind of bringing the person in and saying like, hey, what is this? And just having that policy in place that, we are going to take this on a case by case basis, not that it's just one blanket statement of like, you have something on your background and that therefore we will not hire you, right? Or it's those specific positions that pose a danger to people, like completely understandable. But, not having that blanket statement, I think is really very important, and treating people as individuals.
And Chrissy, I do want to add that, thanks for adding that, is if there's a crime that comes up that's of a sexual nature, those people are excluded from working at the Y, just because we have so many children and families coming in.
Well, thank you. That was a great conversation. So I know we've talked about this, but are there any unique benefits that we should be thinking about for those in recovery? I mean, I know we need to offer reasonable accommodations under the American Disabilities Act, but is there anything else that you might think is beneficial? Chrissy, I might start with you, and then Nancy, if there's any legal obligations that might be held.
So I think individuals in recovery are extremely smart, very talented, very problem focused oriented. That's kind of par for the course for survival prior to entering a recovering lifestyle. We're also very committed and driven. I know personally for myself, I was very driven to really hit my career and make a difference for other people. And I think we are a very understanding group of people. A team member that like others could feel really comfortable coming to and saying like, hey, I might be experiencing this problem. And we would be able to really give like that non-judgmental kind feedback because a lot of us have been there. So there are really very specific qualities unique to us as individuals, those in recovery. And, we do also work a 12-step program, which, we try to live our lives with integrity, right? So I do think there are unique benefits for us as an entire group of recovering people. And I think each person brings their own stuff to the table.
That's fantastic. Nancy, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, there's no like affirmative action for people in recovery, like there might be for race or for gender. However, you have to keep in mind that if the individual had been an employee and goes into a treatment program and comes back when they're in recovery, that's a new employee that you don't have to train. So you lose the learning curve and you have someone who already knows the job, knows what they're doing, knows your business. And all of the points that Christine made were excellent points. unfortunately, what I hear from a lot of my clients is that they have trouble finding new employees that have a good work ethic, that want to come into work, that want to put in the hours, that want to concentrate on doing their job instead of being on social media or talking to their coworkers or whatever. And I agree with Christine that somebody who is in recovery is going to be more focused, is going to have more likely to have the kind of work ethic that is going to be attractive and useful to employers.
Yeah, and Nancy, to that point, I just want to say, for those people that have those clients that do come to you and say that, I would be willing to bet that most of those employees that they're experiencing that with are in very early stages of recovery. And when we enter those early stages of recovery, responsibility and things like that are almost like a brand new novel concept to us. You stop growing the second you start using, especially, in your mind. So if you are, like I said, that 30 days, 90 days, even 6 months, it takes some time to really and maybe those individuals aren't truly committed to the long haul, right? So they might be teenagers. We're seeing a huge influx of 18, 19, 22-year-olds that are in recovery now. So it might not even be, oh, this person's in recovery. It might be this person's still very mature. They're 22 years old, so they're going to be on social media. So the correlation is there, but it's definitely not a causal relationship.
Oh, absolutely. And quite frankly, a lot of the people that clients have issues with and that new employees don't have the work ethic, those new employees are not in recovery. They have never had an addiction. It is just that certain individual, a lot of individuals coming into the workplace now just don't have the work ethic, and it has nothing to do with addiction or recovery. So that's a very good point. And unfortunately, I sound like a fogey sometimes, but some of the younger generation, definitely I see a difference than when we were coming into the workforce, and the work ethic just isn't there. And you're right. I mean, somebody just going into recovery isn't going to have those skills, but a lot of young people don't have those skills and don't have that ethical background.
That's a great point. And it can even say that, a young person who maybe did have an addiction has even longer road ahead of them, because as Chrissy said, your brain stops growing when you start addiction, and then you still have that work ethic that you haven't learned about. So even more of a learning curve for those folks as they come into active recovery. So many employers may have concerns about relapse when hiring an individual in recovery, and I'll say that as in starting their recovery process. Do you have any advice for employers to maybe prevent relapse or to help someone in regaining their sobriety? Maybe it is a newly hired person, or maybe it is somebody that worked for you and then went into a recovery situation.
As a lawyer, that really isn't an area that we get into that often, although, we do talk. I have some very long-term wonderful clients, and that's a conversation I might have with someone from one of those clients, and just, the importance as with any disability of keeping the lines of communication open, and to have the HR person or a manager check in and make sure that the employee is doing okay and whether they have any concerns. But that's something that we would say if somebody had made a harassment complaint or was feeling like they were being targeted for one reason or another. But, again, I think that a lot of it has to do with communication and making sure that the employee feels that the lines of communication are open, so that if they are going through a stressful period and feel like they have to go to extra meetings or counseling sessions or whatever, that they feel comfortable going to their employer and saying, here's what's happening. I need to do XYZ so that the employer can be supportive with that.
Hi, so as a certified relapse prevention specialist, what I can say is that relapse is absolutely not a requirement of addiction. It is not. You can enter, you can go to rehab, you can do all of your things, and then you can stay sober. It is not a requirement of the disease of addiction. Okay, many people do get sober and stay sober. I think because we're seeing such a more young population, we think we're seeing more relapses, but really it's not. I definitely want to put that out there. Also, the relapse begins before actual use. So there will be behavioral signs that you can see from your employee, maybe such as coming in late, calling out more, maybe being more moody, short with their coworkers, things like that. And I think that's when maybe if you have an EAP or something like that, that they could just reach out and say, listen, we're checking in, want to see how you're doing. Do you need some extra time to go to a meeting or to go to continue your therapy? Really what's going on? Is there something going on at home outside of here that maybe we could help you with and support you with? These are all just good things to have even in the workplace in general, right? But there are ways that you can pick up on it and really support that person in not relapsing, because if you bring it to their awareness and if they have been educated in this process of relapse, there is a good chance that maybe you speaking up and saying something could get their butt to a meeting or have them call their sponsor or do something that gets them back to that commitment to stabilization.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I'm going to take a moment just to remind anybody that is watching live this morning. If you have any questions, please feel free to direct it in the Q&A, and we will direct it to the right person on the panel. But as we move along, we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask all of our panelists, are there any best practices that you can share with employers that are either looking to hire those in recovery, or maybe that are thinking, I've been having a tough time filling these positions. Maybe this is what I should do. That this is a population I should reach out to. So, are there any best practices or benefits that they might need to know?
Well, I think certainly for us, one best practice is to treat everyone equally. Just because a person isn't in recovery, they should be treated no differently than a person who's not in recovery. And that includes any policies or practices or disciplinary actions or anything. I think that's important for all the staff. It's also important best practice, I believe, not to disclose anyone's personal information to other staff. The last thing that we would like to see is someone come in and say, oh, that person just came out of AA and we know them. That's not relevant to the job. And I think that needs to be upfront with everyone. If they choose on their own to share information, I think that's healthy. And especially in our situation at the Y, where we're all about people, we tend to talk about everyone, to each other and get to know everyone's personal story. And I think that's good. The other thing too is I think employers and best practices just need to keep an open mind and just not go into any situation with any preconceived notion that and sorry, Chrissy, I'm going to use MVP. Oh, this person applied and they're at MVP, so therefore we have to do X, Y, and Z. No, they're a person too. They happen to go down a different path than we did in life, and we need to support that. There are tons of best practices, but I think it's up to each employer to choose the ones that work best for them.
Those are all excellent points, and really for all employers, treating everybody the same, that's a key principle in employment law. If you treat everybody the same. And also it's so important to have somebody that the employees feel comfortable going to if they do have an issue. And again, it's not just people in recovery. It's employees in general. If you treat your employees well, if they feel as if they are listened to and that they have a place to air their issues and grievances, then the employer is going to end up with a lot less discrimination claims than somebody who is arbitrary or doesn't have the opportunity, doesn't give their employees the opportunity to vent what they're feeling. A lot of employers now have EAP programs which allow employees to go and discuss their problems, although a smaller employer may not. That's why there should be someone in management that people feel comfortable going to. And absolutely, any information regarding a person's past addiction and their current recovery should be kept confidential unless the employee chooses to disclose it. It could be something that is protected by HIPAA. So it could be a violation of the law to disclose it. But just as a general practice, it's a basis on which other employees may treat that employee differently. So you don't want to open up that opportunity unless the employee, him or herself, discloses that information. So absolutely keep it confidential.
Yeah, I would have to agree with the confidentiality piece. Really just kind of keep that person's private life, what you know, keep that to yourself, honor that. Also, I think a general best practice for almost anyone is really, like, any employer is knowing the names of your employees. Like, I know that can be hard to do if you're a CEO, you know, of a huge company, but knowing their names, like knowing, oh, hey, I know that maybe this went on this week. How are you doing with that? You know, just sitting down, whether that person's in recovery or not. I think that's a general best practice, but really holding space for an individual to kind of let loose and get off their chest what they might need to get off their chest can really make a whole difference, a world of difference. And also too, and I don't know if this would be considered a best practice, but education in the workplace, right? Have Narcan there. You know, Mike, he's with the Y, right? You have no idea how many people could be actually under the influence coming there and could overdose, right? Have those policies and procedures in place, because this might not be the person that's in recovery that could overdose, right? This is happening a lot now. So have the Narcan there, be ready for that, have the education surrounding that. You know, and I like to say, a lot of people will say, like, not in my backyard, right? I don't want this stuff to happen in my backyard. And in this current climate in 2022, it's not in your backyard. I hate to break it to you. It's on your front doorstep and it's knocking, right? It's not in your backyard anymore. It's ringing your doorbell. And that's a general rule of thumb for everyone. There's no more 6 degrees of separation.
Perfect. All right. So I am going to read a question that that just came in the Q&A. It says, Delaware County's Second Chance Employment Program helped this person get their career of their dreams, and they are eternally grateful. How did the program get started, and what can they better do to support the program through the company that they work at and to give back to others seeking the same opportunity that they receive? Well, that's fantastic. Chrissy, I think you might be able to talk a little bit about that, how that program started.
Yeah, so we again, MVP Recovery is a sober living program that now currently has an IOP component to it, so a treatment component as well. We started with men's houses, and the men would come in, they would oftentimes have a trade to fall back on, so they'd come in and other guys had come through, maybe started their own businesses, they would go back into that trade. When I started with the women's program, a lot of women didn't necessarily have a trade, and they were going day after day. They were applying on Indeed. Criminal background checks would come back, as Nancy, said, and they were just not getting jobs. And so I reached out to our community leaders and I said, something needs to be done about this, because also too, for someone who is really trying to do the right thing, and then someone says, "Oh no, your background check came back," and you're like, "Well, I was in my." I'm a totally different person now. It really kind of brings back that shame of, I don't deserve this, right? I don't deserve a second chance at life. And so we went to our county leaders and we reached out to employers in Delaware County, and we said, listen, everybody deserves a second chance at their life. If they made a mistake, we're just as capable as the next person in line, but maybe you need to look past certain things that are on the surface. We're not just at what's on our paper. Some people will say, hey, I look great on paper. We might not look good on paper, but we can get the job done.
Well, thank you, Chrissy. And I think Chrissy is being very humble as she talks about this program, but Chrissy is was instrumental in making that happen and really has brought that so much to the forefront here in Delaware County. So thank you for that. And fantastic question from one of our attendees, because it just shows, like, if somebody's watching this, it just goes to show that the people that are in recovery, they are doing well and they want to help others. So it's really such a strong community. Communities across the country are like that, but it really just shows that this person is doing well and wants to help somebody else that needs that extra hand. So that is just fantastic. And we're coming up to time now. So I want to stop the questions and I want to say, what did I miss? Is there something that you want to share with our audience today, or somebody watching in a week or so, that is very important for them to know as they're going into this hiring process? Chrissy, do you want to start since you're highlighted?
I think echoing what Mike has said, treat everybody as an individual. Just if I see this coming in saying that admire the candidates, who come through that are honest, right? Give them that credit. Like, wow, this person that took some major tenacity to come here, to come into my office, to be honest with me. Obviously, they want this job enough that they're willing to disclose something that might risk the job, but could be even greater risk if they don't disclose it, right? So they're taking a risk. They're confiding in you, just as much as you're taking a risk on them. They're taking a risk on you, right? We're trusting you to treat us as individuals and to give us a chance. So I think that's really important for people to know.
Great, thank you so much, Chrissy. Mike, is there anything that you want to add?
I'm going to take a little different twist and just say that here at RWise, we have so many positions open that I feel that people should be applying for jobs, because we do not discriminate in any way, shape, or form. We work with everyone. And we all know right now the crisis that childcare is going through, and people who want to get back into the workforce have no childcare. I think the Y is a tremendous place for people to start rebuilding their resume and rebuilding their career path or their job history. I tell all of our staff that work for us that my job as CEO is to get you to where you want to go as an individual. And if that means you're with us for 6 months or 6 years till you find the job of your dreams, that's what we're here for. And I really believe that we're here to make our community better for everyone in the community. And that includes people in recovery or people not in recovery. That includes families and children and seniors and everyone. And I would encourage all employers not to turn your cheek when someone says I'm in recovery, and not to turn their backs, because they're a valuable workforce, and there's a workforce there that's untapped and needs to be tapped, especially in any employment time, but now when we're all short-staffed.
Thank you, Mike. And Nancy?
Let me just echo, treating everybody the same is so important, but it's also very important to have the communication, because that's a key in any kind of disability situation, that you keep the lines of communication open and you have what they call an interactive process, and just supporting your employees, and whether it's somebody who's in recovery or not, if the lines of communication are open and you show that you are a supportive employee, or you're going to have dedicated employees who stay with you a long time, and you will have less claims. You're not going to avoid them completely. No employer ever does, but you're going to have a smoother employment relationship as long as you keep the lines of communication open and treat everybody fairly.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And if we can bring everybody back on the screen, I just want to take a minute to thank everybody. And I want to read a comment from Lisa Frizzell from Monarch Staffing, who put a little note in the chat to us. So employers should admire candidates who have taken such great strides. They are people you want on your team. And I think that's so important to highlight as we close this seminar or webinar this morning. They are folks you want on your team. I want to thank everybody for being with us for another webinar, an employer panel. Fantastic information today shared from leaders in our community. And I want to thank our partners at EDSI. And Brian, thank you for sharing the information as the added benefit of hiring these folks. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this was recorded and it will be emailed out to all that have registered for this event this morning. It will also be on our YouTube page. And we invite you to share this with anybody that you think this information could be valuable to. We'll put our contact information so we can help you in this hiring process. The folks at EDSI have done a tremendous job in helping find these folks full-time or part-time employment. So we would love to partner you with them to help you navigate this process. So again, thank you everybody from the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, from EDSI, and all of our esteemed panelists this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning, and we hope that you have a great day, a great weekend, and success in finding those candidates you need. Have a great day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.